Home sellers, in 2026, there's a very good chance your buyer or their bank or their title company is going to order a survey. And if that survey finds anything, no matter how small, it can turn a perfectly good deal into a nightmare. We've sold over 2,500 homes, roughly 50 times more than the average realtor. And today, I'm going to tell you two real stories. One where a 1 foot problem with the survey was solved with class and goodwill, and another one where that same 1 foot nearly blew up a closing, delayed the sale, and cost real money. This is how we do it, so stick around and we'll show you how to navigate your survey problems so they don't get out of hand. All right, here we go. Welcome to Talking Realty, the podcast for home sellers who want to make more money, save time, and avoid headaches. I'm Glen, realtor and founder of the Ohio Property Group, where we do the same things as traditional realtors, but instead of charging 6%, we charge a low, flat fee. So you keep a lot more money and you still get better results. Check out the free seller tools at talkingrealty.com. And if you love the show, hit that subscribe button. All right, let's get to it. Home sellers, today I have two very exciting stories for you. Well, maybe not that exciting, but they're stories. How about that? One is going to show you each story is going to show you each end of the survey issue spectrum. Okay. But first, why are we talking about this? Most sellers never, ever think about the survey that happens when they sell their home. To be fair, because most of the time it's not an issue. But when it is an issue, it's in your lap and you don't really know what to do with it. So if the buyer has a lender, or if the buyer themselves wants the survey, one of those two is going to trigger it. Or if they decide to buy an owner's title policy or it's baked into the contract. So any of those triggers are going to have a surveyor showing up at your house at some point. And typically they're done in the first week or two of the deal. And then we get the results back. And most of the time, we never hear anything else about it. So if a survey gets done and any issues that pop up hit your radar, they have to be dealt with. And I will tell you how most of them get handled, but then there's always a few exceptions, which is why we're here, because I live for the exceptions. But if there is any type of wrinkle that comes up in that survey, and a survey is just where they come out and they reestablish the boundaries, the lot boundaries, so the lot lines and the property lines for that property, for the lot, and then they make sure there are no problems, encroachments, or things that went over the boundaries or got into the setbacks, and they just call all of that out in a little 2 or 3 page document, has a drawing and then a little narrative. So if you've seen a survey before, I apologize for that little rabbit hole, but if you haven't, then you might wonder what in the world it is. But if there is an issue, which is not unusual at all, that there's something that shows up as being a possible encroachment, typically the lender is okay. So if the lender's fine and the title company is fine, because many times they'll just say, yeah, whatever, it's not a huge deal, and they were willing to insure the policy for the lender, the issue has no effect on value most of the time or use of the property. But regardless, even if all of those things are true and everybody's happy, the buyer still gets notified because technically it's their survey. They paid for it through their lender or through the title company. So when the buyer gets notified, most of the time they ignore it. But every once in a while, they don't. And that is why we're talking about this. Now, out there on the interwebs, there are probably dozens, if not hundreds, of opinions surrounding what to do if you have a survey issue. And most of them will probably make you think the sky is falling. And you're going to hear all these awful horror stories. I'm going to tell you one horror story today. I'm going to tell you one pretty good happy ending type story and tell you that those are the real edges of what could possibly happen. Remember, we do hundreds of deals a year. And so there's not much I haven't seen, not much my team hasn't dealt with from this perspective. So here we are in the present. This is, like almost all of my episodes, something recent happened and now I'm thinking about it. So I got to talk about it. But anyhow, we've got this house, picture it. Okay. It was built in the 30s. It's in a very old established neighborhood and the sellers have been living there for over a decade. And get this, the neighbors have also been there longer than they have. So you're talking about very long. I don't know about you, but I tend to get to know my neighbors unless they're not very nice people. We'll talk about that some other day. But in most cases, I get along great with my neighbors and we tend to build relationships, your neighbors, right? But anyhow, when the sellers bought the house, there was no survey done. for whatever reason, I don't know if they didn't order it or if their bank didn't want it or if they paid cash, whatever. There was no survey done. And so the buyer's lender in this case decides, okay, we need a location mortgage survey. They send somebody out, comes back, and it says, now picture this. It says there is a less than 1 square foot area of the driveway approach that is up against and slightly over the property line. Okay, we're talking about way down at the curb by the street, where the driveway gets a little bit wider, called the approach from the street onto your main driveway. That little corner, that little diagonal corner is what they were talking about. It was the tiniest little thing. They almost couldn't draw it. It was so small, but it's a survey. They're going to be exact. So the survey reveals this little tiny square of encroachment, and the title company says, hey, no problem. We will still issue the lender's title policy, but we're not going to insure it for the owner's title policy. Now, let me explain something very quickly, and I'll try not to go too far down the rabbit hole, but this confuses a lot of people because, first of all, what are these two policies? And second of all, why are they being treated differently by the title company who issues these policies? Minor encroachments happen all the time. There are fences that are just a few inches into the setback or maybe even over or on the property line. There are driveway corners, just like this one, that are barely crossing the line. When that shows up on a survey, the title company will very often issue a title insurance policy for the lender and include that as part of their coverage, that they're fine, they're aware of this encroachment. If there's ever a problem with it, they will cover it, because the lender doesn't care about protecting the private use of the property. They only care about protecting the value of their loan. So if they ever had to foreclose, that tiny issue isn't going to affect their ability to foreclose and sell the property and get their money back, which is all they care about. But the owner's title policy, that's the one that protects the full value of the property. That policy protects the buyer's ownership and their resale value long term. So if there is a known encroachment, like a fence or a driveway, even a tiny one, the title company often writes that in as an exception. Okay, we'll cover all claims against your title, but that one, because they don't want the neighbors getting together or some shenanigans going on where they're like, hey, let's sue the title company and I'll split the proceeds or whatever. They don't want any of that stuff going on. Okay, back to our story. In almost every case, like I said, the lender doesn't care about these tiny little issues, and the seller probably doesn't care because they're selling. So why would they care? Basically, the whole world doesn't care about this, but the buyer does. So seller lesson number one about survey nightmares is that once a buyer sees a survey exception in writing, you can't unring that bell. You can't just say, no, nothing to see here. So they have to be notified. And 99.9% of the time, it goes like this. They send out the email from the title company or the survey company, and it says, hey, we found this little problem right here. The fence is on the line or the driveway is tiny bit over. And the buyer is like, yeah, who cares? Like, I'm not going to dig up my driveway or move my fence. Like, everything is fine. So no problem. The loan closes and everybody moves on. But that 0.1% of the time, the buyer will panic. They will get a little burr in their saddle and decide, no, 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 we need to fix that. So what happens now is that the buyer gets some leverage because now they want something from the seller, and the seller can't just wave a magic wand and make it go away. But also the neighbor, the neighbor who's being encroached upon, they've also got some leverage. So now we're starting to talk about maybe time, maybe money, and unfortunately some emotions will get involved. And office truth number three, emotions are expensive without fail. So that brings me to a story, and I'll get back to this one. Don't worry, I won't forget. That takes me to a story from very, very early in my career. In fact, it might have been my second or third deal. You're talking 25 plus years ago. So this one shows when there is a problem, how it can work. I call this one the classy neighbor. So my buddy Doc had a property in town, not too far from my office back then, and I sold the house next to his house. And when I say my buddy, he was everybody's buddy. He was an older guy. He was the town dentist. Everybody loved this guy. He was just a saint. So anyhow, I sold the little white house, starter house next to him to a young couple that was moving into town. So Doc's house was a gorgeously restored 2.5 story Victorian, full brick all the way to the top, plus all the fancy little brickwork. It was very old, very beautiful, stately home that he had lovingly restored over a 20-year period. Well, along the way, he had installed this 4 foot or so, maybe 3.5 foot. It wasn't overbearing, but it was a black wrought iron fence that went from the street all the way to the back of his property, all the way across the back, and then all the way straight up. And then it had a nice little gate. There was a sidewalk because it was a long ways from the street to his house. And so it had a little swing gate right there. It was just beautiful. It was the perfect touch for this house. So, anyhow, when we get the survey back on the neighbor's house, which is the one I'm selling, the mortgage survey says that the gorgeous wrought iron fence is too close to the property line. So it's just inches. It's less than a foot. So the bank, unfortunately, in this case, it was a small town bank, and they were a little bit picky, we'll just say. They said, no, we're not going to accept anything less than fixing that before closing. So called timeout, put the closing on hold, and we got a hold of Doc to tell him what was going on. Doc, being Doc, he didn't argue. He didn't, get nasty. He didn't do any of that stuff. And neither did the current homeowners. Nobody was upset because everybody got along. So Doc turns around and says, I'll tell you what, I'll give you $500. He's talking to what's going to be the new owners. He says, I'll tell you what, I'll pay $500 for 1 foot of land that runs right along my fence. That way we're now outside the setback. You don't lose any use or enjoyment of your property because we're not moving the fence. We're just doing it on paper. So he not only offers them $500 for this little tiny strip of land, but he agreed to pay for a new survey, agreed to pay any lawyer costs, any of that stuff. He's going to take care of it all. So we have, in effect, a couple of closings. So we have the closing, if you will, on the little tiny strip. And while we're in the office, I come to find out this wasn't Doc's first turn with this problem. That fence has been causing him problems because the city keeps changing the setbacks, and he keeps having to, well, originally it was installed on the property line, which was not good. So apparently this was the third time Doc had to buy a foot of property around this fence. So he joked at closing he was building his real estate empire 1 foot at a time. He was going to run all the way down that block. But anyhow, the point is that when you handle it with some style and dignity, and keep the emotions out of it, and everybody's rational, you can get through this. So seller lesson number 2, survey problems are almost always solvable if everybody's rational. Unfortunately, not everybody is rational. Hey folks, almost every seller I know has at least a few questions about the process, which is why we offer a totally free, no obligation, one-on-one strategy call for anyone with a property to sell in Ohio. On that call, we're going to help you plan your listing launch. We're going to nail down your price. We're going to make sure you're ready for offers and inspections and appraisals, and hopefully help you get a bidding war off the ground. Check the show notes, the YouTube comments, or just head over to talkingrealty.com and book your free call right now. Seriously, hit pause, go do it now, and I'll talk to you soon. Let's get you on the right track. All right, back to the show. Back to the present. We're going to fast forward 25 years to my current situation. Remember, see, I didn't forget. The tiny little square of driveway that was over the line and all the way down by the street. All right, this is a piece of property no one ever uses. All right, so the sellers tell me when I tell them about this, like, hey, we've got this survey issue, and normally the buyer doesn't care. Well, they cared, so we need to figure out how to do this. And the way we handle these is what's called a quitclaim deed. Quitclaim is one word. Quitclaim deed. It's basically you have a lawyer draw this up, and you have a notary get it signed. And it turns out one of the sellers was a notary. So, okay, great. We can head over to the neighbors. We had this quitclaim deed drawn up describing this tiny little piece of property that was less than a square foot, and that they were going to essentially waive their rights to it so that we could get on with closing. All right. They weren't using it, quite obviously, because it was under my seller's driveway. So there's no way. And apparently it wasn't bothering them then. So the sellers have been friends with them for years too. So they head over, they've got the quitclaim deed, they've got a nice bottle of wine, and they stop over because they've been friends forever, and all hell breaks loose. So the neighbor said, you know what, do me a favor, leave that thing here, leave the deed here, and let us think about it. And they were like, oh, whatever, okay, at first. Well, then a couple of days later, they get a letter from a lawyer. The neighbor wouldn't sign the quitclaim deed. They said that they wanted $10,000 for that little tiny piece of land, or they were going to sue and have my sellers alter the driveway so that it was no longer encroaching on their property, which, by the way, they didn't know until we told them. So that relationship was quite obviously destroyed. We had to delay closing twice, I believe. And then, yeah, we finally got it. It wasn't $10,000, but it wasn't a bottle of wine either. So somewhere between here and there, we got it done. So lesson number 3, a seemingly tiny issue can turn into a mountain and turn a good neighbor into an adversary, an enemy instantly. Unfortunately, when dollars and emotions get involved, things get pretty crazy. So what's your takeaway here? How do you, first of all, how do you avoid this altogether? And if you're going to be selling your house, number one, get a hold of whoever the bank or the title company that closed the house when you bought it. If you don't know who it was, contact your listing agent if you had one, ask them, or buyer's agent if you had one. Hey, which title company had it? Or your bank. If you have a mortgage on the property, your bank will have a copy of the survey, or the title company will, if there was one done. Okay. Now, we just had a quick run in with one of my neighbors, which I said I would talk about it later. Maybe I'll talk about it now. But anyway, we got a weird letter from the court saying that I had to go to court because my neighbor was claiming that my fence was on his property. Now, that fence has been in that yard for 30 years. So I knew it wasn't. And we just bought this particular house maybe 5-6 years ago. We had a survey done, and it was fine. Everything was fine. The bank emailed me the survey. I brought it in with me and everything went away. That was the last I heard of it and the last I've spoken to that particular neighbor. So instead of coming and talking to me, the neighbor went through the courts. So that was fun. Home sellers, this episode of Talking Realty is brought to you by our friends at Associates Title. This team is shaking things up by focusing on what truly matters, putting you, the customer, first. Whether you're buying or selling or investing, whether you're for sale by owner, whether you're working with a realtor, doesn't matter. They've got your back with incredible cost savings and the latest technology to streamline the process. Their secure online portal keeps everyone in the loop, from buyers and sellers to lenders to agents, all while keeping your data safe and communication crystal clear. If you're getting ready to make a move, don't underestimate the importance of having a great title company in your corner. Check them out today at associatestitleinc.com or call my friend Ryan Phillips at 614-419-2418. Remember, they're not just in Ohio, they're in a lot of states. So give them a call, but do not leave your title company choice to chance. And definitely don't let the buyer or their agent make that choice for you. All right, back to the show. If you have a recent survey, great. You can just get a copy of it and then include it with your listing. I would. It won't necessarily be usable by the bank or the title company when they go to reissue everything, but at least you'll have a recent survey. So you have some peace of mind and you have some defense if someone says that you do have an encroachment. Well, if you haven't moved anything since you moved in terms of a deck or a fence or a driveway, well, I'm guessing that either the first survey company screwed up, in which case your title insurance should kick in and help you, or the new survey is wrong. If you don't have a survey and you suspect there may be a problem, as I mentioned, maybe you did some driveway work. Maybe you did put up a new fence. Maybe you put up a new deck or an addition, or you put up a shed, or you did something like that, and you're worried, then you probably should get that looked into. I would probably order a survey. There's tons of places you can do them. Call any title company or just go on to chat or Google and just ask for a local survey company. They're a couple $100 unless you have a massive property. But if you've got an in-town lot that's a little square or trapezoid thing, you shouldn't, if you've got 4 boundaries and not a problem. But if you've got this crazy, 50 acres in the woods and a stream, it's probably going to cost you a little more. So in general, get a quote. They'll tell you about how much it'll be if you want that. And then again, you can provide that with your listing. And if anybody says, hey, you got a problem, you can say, no, I don't. Or if it does reveal a problem, you can address it before you sell. Just like any other problem you have when you sell. If you get a chimney inspection, which you should, and it reveals a problem that you do not want to fix because it's expensive or for whatever reason, just get a quote. What would it cost to fix? Then disclose it. You are now off the hook. When buyers come to buy your house, you've told them this problem, you've told them what it was going to cost. They can't come back later and say, oh, well, we offered you this, but now we know this other thing. We want a huge discount. Okay? No, doesn't work that way. If you don't tell them or you don't give them a quote, then you're subject to the consequences, which is later on when they figure it out, it's a problem. Same with this. If you know your new deck or your new driveway is too close to the line or even over the line, you need to get ahead of that. Find out what it would cost to fix. pull a dock and buy a foot of land from your neighbor when it's all calm and everybody's happy. So there's a couple of ways around it. If you don't know how, get on a call with me. Just look at my show notes. Go to talkingrealty.com. My schedule is right there. Just hop on. I can advise you generally, or if you're in Ohio, you can hire me and I will advise you specifically. But if you suspect that you have this problem, I would tell you, like any other problem with the house, get ahead of it. Paper it, fix it. If you can't fix it, at least get a quote on what it would cost and then disclose it. If you had a survey when you bought it, you should be fine. If you bought title insurance and they did a survey, you're probably covered. Check with your title company to find out. But if you do find an issue through the buyer's survey, so you didn't do any of this and you're on the market and that's when you're finding this stuff, you're probably fine. Like I said, 99.9% of the time, they're going to cover it for the lender, or it's an easy fix. So if not, just try to work something out. Money is good, food is good, dinner out, maybe a week at a timeshare somewhere. I have no idea. But get a quitclaim deed from a local title company or attorney, get a notary, and let's get it fixed. So if you have a bad relationship with your neighbor, things could get dicey. But if you're not on the clock, in other words, before you list the property, that's the time to do it. If you are on the clock, call a timeout, tell them you need time to sort this out. You may lose the buyer, and that's unfortunate. But I think if you communicate very clearly, you should be fine. Most of the time, the buyer's not going to care. And with that, I'll let you get back to your day. Thanks for sticking around. Hopefully you learned a little something or maybe had a little bit of fun. The Talking Realty podcast is brought to you by the Ohio Property Group, a family-owned company where we sell homes for a low, flat fee. If you've got a question, you've got a guest or a topic that you'd like to see in a future episode, I would love to hear from you. Just head to talkingrealty.com and say hello. Until next time, keep making smart moves in your real estate journey. For the Ohio Property Group, this is Glen signing off. And remember, you can sell it. We can help.